Hey friends, welcome back to Guess What? Compliance Can Be Simple. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Guess. Today we're talking about payer audits. And I know, some people get a chill when they hear those two words. But we will be discussing why they feel so disruptive and how preparation, not panic, completely changes the outcome. Now, this episode is for education and compliance support only and does not constitute legal advice. Okay, let's get to it. I have been asked several times, why does payer audits feel more stressful than a CMS audit? And I know many practices that have come my way, they tend to feel that these audits are more aggressive, and they can be. I know that these audits, they often come with short deadlines, limited explanation, and an immediate financial impact. Unlike CMS audits, payer audits are frequently tied to recoupment first, which raises the emotional stakes. And that pressure alone can cause even the well-run practices to respond reactively instead of strategically. Many providers have asked me, how are these audits triggered? And I can tell you that payer audits are often data-driven, and there are common triggers like outlier billing patterns, higher utilization of certain codes, or deviations from peer benchmarks. It is important to note that being audited does not automatically mean that you're doing something wrong. It often means a payer system flagged something that requires additional review. And at the core, payer audits really focus on one question. Does the documentation meet the requirements of the contract? And payers, they are not evaluating your intent, they are not evaluating your quality of care, and they're not evaluating your clinical judgment. They are comparing what was billed to what the contract allows and what the documentation supports. And this is why providers need to understand contract language, because it is critical to audit preparedness. And I do see common risk between many different types of providers. Many practices are unfamiliar with the specific documentation requirements in a payer contract. Documentation standards may vary between providers or locations, and sometimes that creates inconsistency. Then, when an audit notice arrives, there may be no defined response process, and I've seen this time and again. If you do not have a defined process for audits, that will lead to rushed and fragmented submissions. For example, I worked with a practice that received a payer audit request, and their first instinct was panic. They assigned multiple staff members to pull records without any type of coordination, and the documentation was submitted piecemeal. Some records were conflicted, and they barely met the deadline. Now, as you can imagine, the result of that was a prolonged audit and unnecessary recoupment. In contrast, I had another provider. They had a defined audit response process. They submitted focused, contract-aligned documentation, and their audit was resolved quickly. The main point for practices is, if you receive an audit notice, do not panic. Ensure that you have a coordinated, defined audit response, and you take it from there. Additionally, I do want to speak about oversharing in an audit. One of the biggest mistakes that I have seen practices make during payer audits is oversharing. You provide more documentation than they requested, and those documentation can actually introduce inconsistencies and then raise additional questions from the auditors. Payer audits, they reward precision, not really volume. If an auditor asks a question, you stick to the question that's being asked and you answer it accordingly. Do not overshare. Do not offer up more information than what is asked of you. A targeted response aligned with the contract is far more effective than a defensive data dump. And I have seen many practices sit through an audit. The auditor asks, tell me about this system. And they tell them about the system. They also tell them about how that system feeds into another system that then feeds into something else. And at that point, you're digging a deeper hole because now the auditor wants to know, well, what does the other system do? How does it function? Is PHI protected? Who is in charge of that? What happens if the system breaks down? So you see, you go into a succession of questions for something that was not asked originally. Now I have my mini audit moments. You guys know I love to do that. If a payer asks you to justify a service using only the contract language, could you do so without explaining intent? If not, preparation, not panic, is the missing piece. Payer audit readiness is something we work on regularly inside of my compliance support hub. We help practices understand their contracts, standardize their documentation, and build response workflows before audits occur. If you're interested and would like to join the Compliance Support Hub, please go to my website at guestcomplianceconsultantllc.com. Okay, back to our topic of hand. What does true payer audit preparedness look like? I can tell you that. Prepared practices know where their contracts live and what those contracts require. They have standardized documentation expectations across all providers. They designate who responds to audit requests and how submissions are reviewed before they're being sent to an auditor. Now, this type of preparation reduces disruption, it protects your revenue, and it lowers stress for your staff. Remember, payer audits don't have to derail your practice. When preparation is built in, audits become manageable events instead of emergencies that cause panic. Until next time, keep it simple, keep it compliant, and take care of your patients.